Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so my name is Ben Elliot, or Benjamin if it's Sunday, and I'm the founder of the Church Comms Collective. And what is the Church Comms Collective? Very simply, it's a peer-to-peer support network for anybody involved in church or charity communications. It's been going now since, I think, around 2017, 2018 time. And what we're going to be unpacking this morning briefly is overlooking some of the successes of how we've set up and formed that community, some of the failures we've had and how we've learned from those things, and also the ways in which we want to build that out in the future, and hopefully some tips you can take away in strengthening, building, starting your own community, whatever that looks like. So first things first, I guess, is just a very snapshot of actually how did the collective start, what was its purpose, and those type of things. Now, the collective started out of a need. Ultimately, I needed some help. I just started out doing church communications for the first time, helping my church come up with kind of social media strategy, website. And whilst I worked in the corporate sector, I got no idea how to do this in church and actually translating the culture of what our church is trying to do and actually connect with our church family and reach others at the same time. And like many of us, I went on Facebook thinking there's got to be a group here for me. And sure enough, there are some amazing church communications groups, but the vast majority of them are based in America. And a few years ago, those groups themselves were forming around what their identity was. And there was a lot of conversations in there which just wasn't applicable to the specifics of what's going on in the UK church. And not to make too light of it, but some of the conversation threads were just so different to the type of thing that we would have to talk about, talking about how many firearms people were bringing to church that week, what security measures were people having to take and things, and stuff that, broadly speaking, we don't need to think about in the same way. And I realized that what we needed was something actually at the time, I think would have been around the time of the Brexit vote, a lot of different conversations going on. How do we as a church look to God first? How do we actually work together with people of different views, but gathered around this same thing of trying to communicate on behalf of our churches? And that, I guess, is the first thing I want to say about a really healthy, strong community. From my experience, it's gathering around that central core theme. Why are we gathering this community? What is the purpose of it? What is that core thing that community does that no one else does? And that is, so regardless of theology, regardless of denomination, political views, the core thing that the people in the Church Comms Collective are gathering to do from all kinds of backgrounds is to communicate well on behalf of their churches or their charities. So that is a core thing. And I think it's something to regularly revisit and check the heart behind your community and why are you doing what you're doing. If you're starting one, best place to start. What is that core thing that we're going to work on? So the collective started like that. And actually, how did it start? Well, very conveniently, in one of the American groups, somebody said at the start of the thread, "Where are you in the world today?" And quite a few flags popped up, Union Jack. And I was like, right, let's just DM a few of these people and see if they fancy being a part of a separate UK group just for UK stuff. Idea being you stay in these other groups as well. And a handful of people joined over, and it was healthy because it meant that straight away problems that we were facing. So for example, the biggest church administration platform in the UK really is called Church Suite, and that is never discussed in the American groups. It's all about planning center. So immediately to have some people that are on common ground for the admin platform, winner. Then talking about things in a time zone whereby we're not waiting for hours for stuff to come back or missing conversations overnight. It's like, it's real time, it's during our time now. So again, whilst it's a global kind of potential, we're working in a locality. So these few people joined together. There was a real sense of just getting to know each other, and we built it out from there. And straight away, as soon as we could make that actually a physical gathering, we did. So for example, at Premier Digital, we made a point of saying, who's going, who wants to grab lunch together whilst there? Let's put some of these digital faces in reality and actually meet up with others. And we did, and that was just so important for the cohesion of the group. I also had Catherine and Alistair, who came on board very early as just great insights. Catherine works for the Girls Brigade, and she came on board just to help as an administrator, and Ali worked at Cliff College. And yeah, those guys were really just helpful in bouncing ideas and looking at how can we make this a useful space. But a significant catalyst and a significant need was actually during the pandemic. And obviously all of a sudden, loads of people have been thrown in the deep end of how on earth do we do communications? And here was a resource that was UK specific, and we were able to bless and help one another. And that comes down to the next thing I'd say about a really strong community and doing that well, is actually what is the purpose for you doing it? And from talking to people in the past who tried to do these things out of a primary reason being a financial gain or like a personal thing, I've often seen them just not quite get there unless they've had significant money to invest in it. So the core thing which comes to me is doing this as, firstly, something to serve others. I love helping others. So that's a personal thing within me. It's important to serve. And the other thing is to actually try and make it feel like a hobby and not feel like work, because it could easily feel like that. And I've had this mentality all along as it's grown from 10 of us to 1,500 of us. This is a hobby. This is a passion, and actually to live in the passion of what it is. So that's really important. Again, coming back to that key thing of what is that core element that we're gathering around. It has to be a passion. Make it your passion and live it out. If it's not something you care about, if it's not something you're interested in, if it's something you're thinking is just for financial gain, then personally, I just don't think that is the best way to build out and actually see growth there. So those are a couple of core things. Now, the Facebook group itself is fantastic, and that is brilliant. However, Facebook itself, you might be a passionate fan of Facebook, you might be on the fence, you might detest it. There are definite downsides as well as upsides to Facebook. So on one hand, it's free, it's there, but we're competing with other things. We're competing with an algorithm, which means that any proportion of the members of the group are actually going to see and engage with the content. We're competing with advertising. We're competing with, your friends' new puppy pictures, or where someone else went on holiday last week. So we're competing amongst this huge arena of noise. And we're also competing, to be fair, with people who very understandably and legitimately don't particularly want to be on that platform, but need a community and need some help with stuff. And that's something that I was wrestling with and thinking about. And I thought, right, how can I help those people who don't want to be on Facebook and those people who aren't on it at all whatsoever, but still could do with some support? So we explored several different alternative social media platforms. We looked into Disciple, and we looked into and landed on Mighty Networks. Mighty Networks is a platform which I would totally recommend in terms of its price point and accessibility. I self-fund that, and it's not too bad in terms of annual payments. But the core elements, I'd say, in terms of the platform usage and how it operates, are so akin to Facebook that it's familiar processes. You can be part of groups, you have a profile, you can message others. There's some other key features in there, so you can actually see with your connections and things, actually where else they are in terms of 30 miles away from you, 100 miles away, which can be really useful for bringing people together. But it as a platform, the great thing about it is there's no advertising, there's no other noise. It's just solely focused around the core thing which you're gathering to do community on. So with that in mind, I was like, great, let's do this. So last autumn, I set that platform up, the Church Comms Collective, on Mighty Networks. There's a standalone app. It's accessible in your browser, win-win. But the truth be told, and here we go into one of the big failures, is me being an over-optimistic person, thinking that it would just seamlessly translate and seamlessly everybody would go over there and they'd be really happy to use that space. And realizing that things like this, actually changing habits and trying to get people to adopt something new, is a significant challenge unless there is a significant incentive to do so. We'll come back to that in 1 second. So the mentality I've had always to running the Facebook group, and something that I would recommend applying to any community, is if it's yours and you're running it, and also if you're doing this with other people, is to bring them together on this vision, is to really treat it as much as possible like you're hosting a house party, and trying to be a good host. Now, my experience of being a good host at a good house party is the house is laid out in a way that it's ready for people to come in and enjoy it. There's drinks out, there's food, there's nibbles, there's things ready for people to enjoy. And then the next thing is actually, as people arrive at the door, making them feel so welcome. The house is warm, the fire's on if it's cold, or you're out in the garden with lights and music playing. You want to create a really lovely setting. And we want to do exactly the same thing in a digital context. So when people arrive, we want to welcome them, call them out by name. So glad you're here. What's your story? Where are you from? How can I help you? This is what the community is about, reminding and repeating and refreshing for all the existing members and the new ones. This is the point of this community. And that's really vital, I found. And that helps be a good host, and particularly in the early days, when there was 50, 60 of us, or even into the low hundreds. As soon as someone popped on from Birmingham or something, I'd say, oh, amazing, you should connect with so-and-so. They're at such and such church in Birmingham. Or, great, you're a graphic designer. Do you know this guy who's also a graphic designer? Whatever those things are, making those introductions. And also, if someone's got a key question, which we always encourage people to ask. So, I'm struggling with how to do, let's say, Squarespace websites. Great, I can list a whole host of people within our community straight away, made by Dave and Benji Lyon and the Digital Church Toolkit, people like that, and say, right, these guys can give you some really great advice about how to do these type of things. So it's straight away linking in people so that it's like straight away you've got value from being there. And then hopefully that means that people will come back to do the same, but also to promote a culture where they themselves take ownership of that party. So if you're a party and stuff, and you're talking to somebody, and they, they're talking about a particular area, you're like, I know that person over the other side of the room knows about that kind of stuff. You would make that introduction or tell them about this and go and have a word. It's the same thing in a healthy digital community. It's connecting people around like-minded problems, questions, and just enabling and trying to see that growth happen. So when we tried to take it off Facebook and kind of duplicate the community on Mighty Networks, the big failure for which solely sits on my shoulders is time and not being able to be a good host. So I wasn't present, haven't been present. I thought that the organic elements of people just continuing to carry out the culture within the Facebook group would continue on Mighty Networks, but the reality is you've got people still operating Facebook and they're having to duplicate their things. Why would they go into this community where they're getting 1 or 2 answers for a problem versus 20 in Facebook? And it's kind of thinking about people's habits, and we like particular social networks. We like to be operating in that space, and to try and again take people into what you want isn't always necessarily the best of things. So one core thing to ask yourself as you're looking at communities and asking how do I grow a strong one is, what platform is a platform which you're excited about, and a platform where you can actually facilitate something for your community and your people. So applying those things. So if you're going to be using Instagram, if you're going to be using TikTok, if you're going to be using Facebook, like predominantly we do, how can you actually really garnish community value? And I would say that is going to be in the strength of the content for which gathers around that significant reason that you're there, and then interacting and over-interacting almost with the people who are engaging with that content. So using the comment threads, for example, on Instagram or TikTok to ask further questions, to ask people directly, actually engage with any single interaction you see. When people like it, reach out to them. And this takes time, and this comes back to it being a hobby again. It's got to be something you're doing for joy, for fun. I was really impacted, and I continue to be impacted by people like Gary Vee, who, if you look at the strength of his personal reach and what he does as a personal brand, it's about content that he can create to serve the people who listen to him. Very, like, I don't think I've ever seen him at the end of one of his kind of pieces of content ask someone to buy a product or something like that from him. I guess sometimes he promotes conferences and stuff, but it's all about what he can do to help inspire others. And he got this kudos, which then allows him in a separate light to be recognized for the value he brings, and is able to do what he does in terms of his media organizations and his companies. And I guess the same thing for in the age we're living in now is how can we create content which is genuinely of benefit to people and helpful to people. It's the only way we can penetrate algorithms, otherwise is by spending a lot on advertising, and that's something which, if you're doing something like this as I do as a hobby and it's not funded in any way, isn't really possible. So in terms of actually creating and migrating, say, a community, I think it's really important to understand the dynamics of platforms. And as things change and adapt, we can easily, again, spread our time over lots of different places. And I would say, my personal experience, better to do one house party group community really well in one location, and then look at how can we actually, at the appropriate time, take incremental steps from that if there's people itching for the next thing. And I guess good leadership also of actually going, in my case, with the Mighty Networks move, if I'd actually carved out enough time to really invest in that, and even backing to be able to kind of go, right, I need a handful of people around me to help do this. And this is the reason we're doing it. If you're passionate about church communications, you're passionate about this, come on board and help actually live out this dream out, and the purpose behind it to equip people to be able to serve their churches well, to share Jesus within their locality. So big questions to ask yourself. But if we come back, just a refresher again, what's that core reason you're gathering around? What is that core element? What platforms can be best to be able to connect people into that? How can you serve those people well? Being a great host, making introductions, make it a hobby and a passion. It has to be something that you've got a passion for, to be able to invest time in and be prepared to do that outside of standard working times. Those are the kind of core elements of, I guess, attitude required to do it. So I would constantly be asking myself, what things do actually I need to do to help shape this culture? What things can I do to be encouraging members here, and how to do that? And a dream scenario would be able to apply a huge portion of your time and concentrate on it. But many people will be starting a community or running it in addition to lots of other things they're doing. So working out a sustainable plan. So in terms of sustainability, I tend to do a quick check in the morning after I've done my kids' school runs. I'll just jump on and see if there's any interactions and stuff that come on overnight. And I'll also try and do the same literally on lunch breaks and at the end of the day. Try to separate my time out so it's appropriately aligned and doesn't consume every moment, because it's the amount of research there is to evidence how checking social media too regularly can just completely throw our days off course, and that would happen for me big time. So making those sustainable times of doing it for me, like I said, morning, lunch and evening. And then also being attuned and being aware of things which could highly affect your current community. So I was just blown away during the pandemic when people rose to the challenge of the digitalization of church and what that looked like. And we had some great sessions, people coming in, creating great content, creating Mark Crosby from Vineyard helped pull together this amazing resource with loads of useful links and things. There was guys like Anthony Lear from the Church Tech UK group leading a lot of stuff around church tech specifically, and how can that be done well to serve the church in the pandemic. And it just meant that it was like, everyone to the stations, it's time to really nestle down on how we can do this. And to some extent that's happened in the past fortnight or so since the passing of the Queen. Again, something which affects the way, or some of the way we communicate as churches. But there's a need for sensitivity to reading what's going on, understanding the platforms we're using. And it's a problem that straight away we're garnishing different opinions on different resources to help one another. And that is a culture that I'm proud to say isn't me, it's the people coming together, gathering around this thing, and actually doing that really, really well. So the Church Comms Collective, in terms of its future and what we want to see there, well, hopefully I'll be in a position to give even more time to that in the future. That's something that I'm working towards, a plan of how that can be done, just to be able to, I guess, be there to serve people. And personally, it has to be someone, I guess, to steer that ship. But ultimately, the strength of the community is in the people that are part of it, the people that are contributing to questions, contributing, actually asking, evolving, sharing useful things. And I think as we do that, we'll have to keep asking ourselves, is Facebook the best place to do that? Do we need to move out? And the reality of that process as well, having gone through the process we did with Mighty Networks, is that we would actually be able to do it far more incrementally and actually try and not, rather than replicate what we have in one particular platform, because the way we use Facebook is very different to other platforms, actually start it in its own strength, its own breadth on another platform. And what that is, I guess, depends on where we are. We explored Clubhouse recently. I realized this is going to need a lot of time to do Clubhouse. So it didn't take off. Clubhouse is a voice-only social network, if you're familiar with that. And yeah, looking at TikTok and things like that as well. And there's obviously so many different platforms we can use, and they have unique cultures and unique ways of operating in their own right. So we need to think along those lines and be prepared for change, at the same time honoring the existing community spaces we have, how they're operating, how they're working. So there's some of my insights. I hope that's useful to you in terms of kind of key things. One thing I'd say is, if you've got questions, if you want to know more, if you want to see how the group operates itself, you can join the Church Comms Collective. You can access it via thechurchcommscollective.com. There's links there to the Facebook group and the Mighty Networks standalone platform, which is still in existence. And then in addition to those things, I'd say, like, feel free to reach out to me as well. So I am available. I think my links are available connected onto the Stronger Network platform. So if you want to be able to ask me any more questions, if you want some specific advice, I'm happy to lend my ear and have a conversation about that.